Hello everyone, it's Donna here from Succeed with Dyslexia for another really informative chat with a fantastic expert. Today we are exploring all issues around well-being at work, specifically around those who experience a disability. And of course our particular interest here at Succeed with Dyslexia is dyslexia and neurodiversity. And I can't think of anyone more best placed to have this conversation with than Chris Catt. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi, Donna.
Thank you so much for giving up your precious time, Chris. I'm just going to give an introduction, and then if I may, I'll come to you to kind of share with our listeners all your expertise around this issue in terms of well-being at work and really reaching our full potential in the workplace. So as I say, Chris, you're a real expert here, and thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom with us during this chat. You are a disability and business coach and mentor, and you have been internationally recognised and award-winning as a coach for the last 2 years. You were also voted one of the top 100 most influential disabled people here in the UK. So as I say, thank you so much for this chat, because I think it's really going to make a difference for those of us in the workplace who are thinking about how we can overcome barriers and reach our full potential. So Chris, on the back of my introduction, would you like to say a few words to our listeners to set the scene of, your journey within this fantastic career?
Okay, so my journey is quite a long one. It begins many years ago, really. I've had quite a few different career sort of options. So first of all, I was an engineer, then I was a welfare rights advisor, then I went to university, then I became a supported employment advisor, managed various placement teams and contracts in the welfare to work sector. But in 2012, I think my calling kind of arrived, really, where I realised at that particular point that it was the right point for me to sort of basically work for myself and actually really do what I wanted to do rather than do what other people wanted me to do. So took the plunge and kind of here we are. But obviously that's a very sort of shortened version of how I've got to where I am. I think it's the skills you learn as you develop in life and as you progress in life. I mean, one of the things to say about myself is, for your listeners and for your viewers, is I have a severe sight impairment, but, and this is where the but comes in, that doesn't define me. It doesn't define my life. It doesn't define who I am. So I'm not Chris with the disability. I'm not disabled Chris. I am Chris, actually. That's how I introduce myself. And people will notice, I mean, any of you will notice if you want to look closely at my eyes, that one eye looks partially closed. That's because that's a false eye. Okay, but also it didn't used to look that closed. What happens is over time is, as a false eye and your face changes as you get older, the eye socket sinks back further into your head a bit. So the eyelids tend to droop over the false eye more, but they can only make a false eye a certain size. So they can't just keep making them bigger and bigger and bigger so it looks open. So eventually they could cut a piece of the eyelid away so the eyelids look more sort of open. But it's really more of a cosmetic thing. So it's not something that's sort of on my radar of things to have done. And the other thing my left eye does is you'll see it move around a lot. Okay, it's got nystagmus, so it can't focus on one thing straight away. So it tends to basically go all over the place. All right, so if any of you are just wondering, that's all. Let's clear that elephant up in the room and get that over and done with. And so you all now know.
No, thank you, Chris. And I think, when we've got people like yourself talking in this really authentic, wise voice, it really helps others who don't feel confident enough to speak in that way. Inspires them, I think, to share, their thoughts and their experiences as well. I'm guessing based on what you've just shared and your fantastic, experiences over the years. I mean, my goodness, what a journey you've been on. It really does put you really well placed, Chris, to talk about how you can be a great mentor and coach to others. Talking about, the workplace, and obviously we've had a real focus on that over the years because of COVID and so on. What do you feel is and this is a big ask, Chris, so get ready. If anybody can answer this, I think you can. What are your thoughts then, based on that journey and your expertise and all the different adventures you've been on? What advice can we give to those who are listening to this conversation who think, how do I overcome barriers at work? I'm neurodiverse, I have dyslexia, maybe I have all the disabilities. How can I overcome barriers at work? And how can I tap into my talents actually to really, make the best of myself and reach my full potential at work?
Yes, that is a big question.
It's a big question.
It's one of the key things that I found, and I find a lot with neurodiverse people I work with, is that it's to do. First of all, it's a very normal thing to fear change. It's very normal to also fear that we might fail, that we don't want to do something because we don't want to risk failing and be seen to fail by others. So we can play in the coaching world, we would use a term, we can play very safe. We can stay within our comfort zone and we cannot push ourselves to potentially, reach more success or our potential, because there's always that risk that putting ourselves out there, putting our head above the parapet will lead to us potentially not doing as well as we first thought, or we might fail. But worst of all, and it's the biggest thing of all, is nobody likes to be seen to fail. So some people coast along through life just accepting mediocrity. They accept that, okay, I've got a job. I suppose I'm lucky. Should feel lucky that I've got a job. Some people don't have a job, especially people with disabilities and people who are ND. Is that, it's harder to get a job. So you tend to, all your family and friends around you will tell you that you should be grateful for what you've got, stay with what you've got, you're lucky. And of course that doesn't help, because they wouldn't say that to somebody else. So when it's said to you, and it's kept on being said to you, is you kind of feel trapped in situations where other people would just say, no, it's an opportunity. You just take it, you go for it. So there is that expectation of others, to accept what you want. But the other thing that I would say that's massively important with change, and with, as particularly, that I experienced in my own career, was I tended to have a very flexible, adaptable approach to work. I could be very, like many people, and certainly many people with ND, I could be very fixated on one occupation. When I was an engineer, I didn't want to do anything else. I couldn't imagine myself working in an office. I couldn't imagine myself wearing a suit or anything like that. It just wasn't me.
And Chris, was that way back then in your career at that stage when you said you couldn't imagine? You've talked a little bit there about fear in the people that you support and coach. Was that fear within you, or you just couldn't, imagine yourself in those ways?
I couldn't imagine myself in those ways. But one of the things that I was very, very fortunate as is when I was growing up, I was not treated by my family as disabled. So I was very much treated like, if you want to ride a bike, if you want to do this, if you want to do that, if you want to be the first one amongst all your friends to climb the tree and fall out of it, then you go and do it.
Yeah.
And so I did. So I kind of had this I suppose some people call it masking these days, where I tended to not live my life looking at my disability and thinking, okay, that restricts me of what I could do. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. I would just be more like, I wonder if there's a way around it. I wonder if I could do that, or shall I just try and see if I can do it? And so I was very much like, I didn't give things a lot of second thought. You know, when I went into engineering, I always tell this story of our ability to talk ourselves into a situation is, I was offered a job once with a big company in Plymouth where they wanted me to machine components that weighed a couple of tons. And these components had to be lifted by cranes across the workshop to one machine to another machine. And they were going to seriously consider employing somebody with a severe sight loss to move this equipment across a factory that they couldn't see from one side off to the other. And it was just like I said to the guy who was interviewing me, I said, but, you know, what about what I see? And he said, well, that's probably, we'll just work something out, won't we? He said, but, you know, you've got the skills to do the job. And it was kind of like afterwards, I just thought, this is just silly. You know, if I dropped something on somebody, I would kill them. So I didn't take the job in the end. That was one occasion where I did actually allow my sight to actually dictate whether I should or shouldn't take the opportunity. But I tend to find it's what's going on in your head that is the big thing. So, you know, your mind, we use the term mindset, don't we? People go, oh, my mind's set on that or whatever. But my mind has always been inquisitive. It's always been, you know, what is, you know, is the grass greener over there sort of thing? You know, let's go and have a look. You know, let's not settle for what we've got. Let's just push forward and push forward and push forward. And so I kind of, I'm not being big-headed or arrogant in trying to say that I somehow find that my work with people is different, because I don't see my clients as disabled first and foremost. I don't work with somebody who's got dyslexia, for example, and go, oh yes, that's dyslexic Joe. Oh yes, yep, they've got these traits and they're dyslexic and whatever, and that's their reason why they do that. And that's true. I might know that, but that isn't how I work with them. You know, I don't keep banging on about their dyslexia to them, sort of thing, and going, oh, that's that. Unless they say something like, why do you think that is why I see things as I see them, sort of thing. So then we might talk about, you know, the more technical side of how our minds work and things like that, and how neurodiverse people are different to neurotypical people, sort of thing. You know, what is different in our minds? You know, why are our brains different? But again, what we can't do is we can't generalize either way, because, you know, I've worked with many people who are neurodiverse who are not typically neurodiverse, you know, sort of thing. They might have a diagnosis, but they don't have some of the characteristics that you would expect, or they're much more restricted, or they've found coping strategies that have helped them overcome those things.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I love what you're saying, because there is a label, whatever label it is. We all, you know, our whole lives really, whoever we may be, we collect labels as we go, and it becomes part of our identity, I guess. But from your perspective, Chris, I love what you're saying, because you're taking a real holistic approach of the person who's there working with you. Yes, as you say, they may have dyslexia, other differences, other disabilities, and it's acknowledging that, I guess, isn't it? But then putting that to one side and then looking at the person in front of you and working with them and really getting to know them as well, I suppose.
Yeah. The other bit of advice I would give with regard to the question here about, you know, how do you reach your potential and stuff like that is what I have found. I found this myself, but I've also found this with my most successful clients, whether that's entrepreneurs or whether that's people in the workplace, is you have to have structure. You need structure and you need focus. You need to actually focus on doing one thing well, or a couple of things well, but not 20 things well, because you can't do 20 things well. You know, you can't do 20 things all at once. I know that there'll be a lot of people here on this particular chat who would disagree with me and say, well, no, Chris, that's how I think. You know, I've got 20 things going on in my brain at one time. That doesn't mean, however, that you're achieving the things you could achieve if you could get more focus on a few things rather than 20 things, because there's, at the end of the day, there is only so much brain processing power. It's like a computer. If you have 20 different applications open on a computer, you're running complex calculations on spreadsheets and things at the same time as databases and all sorts of things, then the memory of the computer can only cope so much at any one time. And it's going to have a trade-off between saying, well, if you want to do that and you want to do that, then you have to basically, this has to be a bit slower. So, there's only so much processing speed. And that's, again, a term, isn't it, used a lot in the neurodiverse world of, processing.
Yes.
Is the processing speed is very much, our brains are very much like a computer. If we've got 20 different things going on at the same time, then our brain cannot process, it cannot recall those files in our heads as quickly as it could if we were focusing on one thing. So to be successful, and again, this isn't easy. We're talking about people who, if you're looking at ND people, and again, not all, but ND people in general, and you're saying, okay, you need to focus, this takes time, because it takes time to learn. We learn patterns of behavior in our lives. We don't realize it, but we do. So we learn how to do, let's say, a pattern of behavior might be to cook a meal or something like that. We know that we've got to do certain things, and we do them in a certain order, and we process them in a certain order. And what we don't like and where it goes wrong is when somebody, let's say you're making a cake and somebody decides to move the eggs or something like that to a different place in the kitchen. And suddenly all your plans of what you're doing have gone out the window. But the processing part there has been basically damaged because somebody's interfered with what's going on. So your processing of the situation is not as it should be. So that's one thing. I mean, focus is an important thing. But when I talk about planning, I'm not talking about literally writing out reams and reams and reams and reams of information and stuff like that. When I plan with my clients or plan with anyone I'm working with, we'll just end up with one sheet of A4 paper, and it might be a diagram. So it might be like a flow chart or something like
Yes.
that. It might be a picture, because another side of a skill I use is, have you heard of NLP?
I have, but I wonder if you don't mind giving an overview of what that is, just for anybody listening who isn't sure.
So NLP is something called neuro-linguistic programming. Now, it sounds all very exciting, sort of neuro-linguistic programming. But to put it in its most simple terms, it's basically how our conscious brain and how our unconscious brain work together. So it's very much about understanding different perspectives of the world. So we are also, all of us, we are either visual, kinesthetic, or auditory people, generally. That's a general rule. But in my experience, I've come across, I would say, a significant amount of ND people who are visual. They want the bigger picture. They want the diagram. And you'll hear this in language. So if you listen to what people say, and I just gave you a clue there, if I kept using terms like, I'm listening to you, Donna, I can hear what you're saying, then what I'm indicating to you in my language, which is the linguistic part of NLP, is I'm indicating to you that my dominant representation system of the world is auditory. So if you wanted to connect with me and think, okay, I need to really show Chris that I'm really following him, if you started responding to me back with auditory language and saying, yes, Chris, I heard what you said, but that wouldn't necessarily be your dominant. That isn't necessarily your dominant language. But if you hear people say things like, I can see your point, this is big picture stuff, we need to draw a diagram, we need to visualize what's going to go on, is they're being very visual about those things. And when you understand that, that can help you massively, especially say as an entrepreneur, but it can help you massively in the workplace as well, because you can communicate much more effectively with people by just taking that one basic principle and thinking, how do people talk to me? What sort of representation system of the world do they have? And if they're visual and if they're auditory or they're kinesthetic, so if they were kinesthetic, they might say a lot of things like, I'm really getting a feeling about this. This is feelings and emotions. You know, I'm really, you know, getting a strong urge that we need to move this table to over here because we could then enjoy the sunshine, which will make us feel all warm and happy and whatever. So it's those subtle language traits you hear in everyone does it. Some people mix it up a bit, but if you listen for long enough with people, you will hear dominant language styles, dominant language styles. And the reason I'm mentioning this is it's one very easy way in the workplace to improve communication, to be better understood with people, is to basically just go, you know, you've heard that term, haven't you? Trying to get on their wavelength, trying to trying to build rapport with them, trying to relate to them more.
Which would be great in an interview as well, Chris, isn't it? You know,
absolutely.
Whilst you're, you know, in the job, but if you're looking for new jobs and new ventures, I mean, that's a great insight you've just shared there in terms of that. Really, I guess the bottom line is really listening to people who are talking to you in that way, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I would say in the workplace, and this is very personal to people, is in spite of me saying that I don't live my life as a disabled person, at the same time, in any situation where I've ever worked, I've had an opportunity to teach people how I see the world, I'll take it. You know, I always remember, I'll give you, this is a quite strange situation. I remember being on a course at a business finance course at South Devon College. And I remember we had to talk about where we worked to all the other students just for sort of 5 minutes, and then they could ask questions. And of course, I knew what was going to happen with mine is the moment I talked about my work is all the younger people, because we were a mixture of more mature students and young people, all the young people just simply wanted to ask me about my site. It wasn't anything to do with work. They wanted to know, what do you see? And they were told off by the lecturer, you know, oh, no, that's not fair. You know, you shouldn't ask Chris that. And I said, no. I said, how can they know if they can't ask? You know, I said, how can they learn? How can they know what they don't know? You know, you can't know what you don't know. So I said, no. Let them answer the question. Let them ask the questions. I'll answer them as best as I can, whatever way I can. But I'll answer their questions. Yeah. And it just went on for over an hour, sort of thing. And it was like, you could just tell. But for those people, for those young people who had never experienced it, let's say a disabled person, or even, you know, someone with dyslexia or something like that, possibly, or they had a condition themselves that they masked and tried to hide. You know, perhaps they had dyslexia, but they didn't want to admit it to their friends, anyone else they knew. They didn't want to tell their employer, whatever it might be. But it's so empowering to help people realize that we have a lot more control in our lives than we realize as to how we influence other people. I mean, I'm a big advocate in the workplace of us being the best messenger for what it's like to be us.
Yes.
So if, for example, if you are dyslexic, but again, you mentioned confidence earlier. This is easy if you're a confident person, of course. But I always say to people, you know, people used to say to me, oh, we need some disability awareness training. We need some dyslexia awareness training. I said, okay, But how long do you think that training will last for in those other people's minds? I'll tell you how long it will last. It will last as long as the course lasts. And when they go back to their desk in the afternoon or whatever, let's say if it's a half a day course, most of it will have been forgotten. You know, most of what they were covered, most of what they trained would be forgotten, because what we're asking for is the impossible. We're asking for a course to change behavior. So we're asking for a course to make people suddenly become much more aware and then also change their, let's say, their unhelpful behaviors and things like that. Well, that can't happen. You can't change a behavior just by clicking your fingers.
Yeah.
Behaviors take absolutely ages to turn. I mean, to use an example, if you think of, say, which could apply to any of us, is you think of, let's say you want to get fit and healthy and you're not so fit and healthy. Well, you don't just go in the gym or start running or eating more healthily and suddenly your life changes and you don't need any help. You know, everyone who tries to get fit and healthy will say to you is, you know, I'm having a bad day. I've just gone and had another 20 biscuits. I just felt like eating them. I think we all know that feeling, don't we? You know, I certainly know that feeling. I go to the gym, but you know, there's days where I think I'm gonna have a biscuit, and then the next minute I've had 2, and then I've made myself a drink and had another 4. You know, before I know it.
So it's up and down, I guess, is what you're saying, isn't it? And
yeah,
you know, I think I love what you're saying, because I think you're right. You know, I come from a training background, and I think it's fantastic, isn't it, Chris, if you're brought in to deliver something because there's a want there, and you know, you can see there's a desire for whatever reason for the organisation to start to change practice or whatever. But I think you're spot on, and I love the analogy you made around, you know, the journey that a lot of us are on about trying to get fit and so on, because sometimes it's fits and starts, isn't it? So that what's the answer to that though, Chris? Is it for folks who the whatever the training may be around, people who are there within the organisation who that resonates with, just constantly putting it on the agenda, speaking up, making sure it doesn't fall out of people's radar again? Is that the answer to that?
Yeah, and this is why I say we're our own best self-advocates, because
brilliant. Yeah.
One of the reasons is, and certainly like you're saying yourself as a trainer, and that is one of the ways round this situation, I find, is that if you're working, and this is where for employers this is powerful, if you've got someone in your team who's neurodiverse and they're a confident person and they're quite happy to share what it's like and to share the good and the bad and, you know, explain things, because one of the things for employers that's quite scary is they hear a term like somebody says to them, let's say, tells the HR person that, oh, you know, the reason I'm not so effective at my job is it takes me longer to process things.
Yeah.
But then nobody explains to your manager what that really means in practice. You know, if nobody tells your manager how that really affects you on a day-to-day basis, then they can't help you. They can't help you to be more effective in your job. But if you're thinking about it, say like when I was going back to training, if I said, okay, so training, the problem with training people on a short training course is it doesn't change the behavior, not unless it's repeated and repeated and repeated, is that then you get into a situation where if, however, you're honest with your manager and you're sharing your beliefs and your thoughts and, you know, sort of almost teaching them, upskilling them, educating them constantly on sort of, you know, how they can help you, is that over time becomes, you know, a process where they've learned that. So now after a while, they don't have to keep asking you anymore what help you need or what support you need. They will just automatically know, okay, well, what did we do last time? We did this, that helped. Or they've learned by now, which is the classic one, which I'm sure you'd agree with, Donna, is ask. This is what we want people to do in the workplace, is just ask. But we have to get over this politically correct sort of fear that is endemic in workplaces now, where people are frightened to ask.
Yes.
You know, because they're scared that they're going to be accused of being bullies or harassing people or things like that, or victimization. So
on the back of that, Chris, sorry to interrupt, but you've just really triggered loads of thoughts in me now, because on the back of that, and you're absolutely spot on, how much, in your opinion, all your expertise, how important is the culture then within a workplace? If we want colleagues to ask us for things, we need to make sure people are confident enough. We've talked a fair bit about self-belief and confidence today, about making that ask, isn't it? So where are you at in your views about culture? I know it's a word that's often used, but to me, it's got to be up there with probably one of the most important reasonable adjustments that we can make is the culture of the organisation. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so culture is very important. I would compare. I compare culture to, I've used the word mindset, which we often associate with individuals, don't we? But I tend to also see culture as a mindset thing. Brilliant. So a lot of organizations have an historical culture that's evolved over years. And there's that saying, isn't there? Well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we always do things. Until somebody turns around and says, so why do we do it this way? Why do we keep doing it this way then? Is this the only way? And this, again, I think in cultural terms, this is where neurodiversity is, sort of got this massive, powerful edge over neurotypical people. It's always the neurotypical people who will say, let's carry on doing what we've always done because we know it works and we know it's effective. But somebody neurodiverse is going to come along and say, well, I don't find this very easy to do, so I thought we could do this. Yeah. Now, which is often what we call disruptors now. A lot of neurodivergent people class themselves as disruptors, isn't it? That word has become a very positive one now. Yeah. And disruptor, moving from work to entrepreneurship, to be a good entrepreneur, you have to be a disruptor.
Oh, really?
To actually disrupt what's done. So, I mean, if you think about it, all the big inventions, all the big changes in the world are all basically disruptions of what was once normal. So it was once normal that we all hoovered with a big hoover with a cable and it made lots of noise and you had to push it everywhere. And now you've got all these, sort of Dyson type hoovers and things like that, you can charge and you can sort of walk around the house with it and things.
And James Dyson, of course, is dyslexic. So could there be a correlation there between that disruption? Because he's neurodiverse. You're giving me a lot of things to think about here, Chris. It's fascinating to chat with you. In your role then as the coach and the mentor, how much are you having to be a disruptor when you're going in to support your clients? Okay, so this is the view I always take with my clients is if I'm working with somebody, they are center stage. That's the person, that's my focus. And to do that, you see, this is where you don't get to be an international award-winning coach just by doing some coaching courses and saying you can coach people. Yeah. Is to be recognized for something that is exceptional is you have to be exceptional. So I tend to very much focus on my clients. So for example, if I'm working with somebody, I mentally prepare myself for that person. So I will do meditation, I will do mindfulness. But the thing I really focus on is I actually literally focus on them to the point where I think, okay, I can now feel an energy from you. I can feel exactly what we need to be doing. Nothing else matters at all. It's one of those situations where I often use, I'm a scuba diver, so I often use this analogy to try and explain to people. If you're in a life and death situation, potentially, there is a point where your focus is so focused on what you need to do that nothing else, you can't hear, see, feel anything else at all. And when you've
been, say, on a scuba dive and you just literally come back to the surface and you're literally there for a second or two in the sea, waiting to be picked up, let's say, by the boat, is your mind is completely empty of all your worries, all the problems, whatever. Now, what I'm saying is that is the state of mind that I want to get to with my clients. If I'm going to work with somebody, I want to be completely what we call empty. I don't want to come there with, worrying about X and worrying about Y and, sort of thinking, oh, you didn't do very well with the last session, did you? So you're going to not do very well today. It is being completely empty and ready to sort of work with them. And that focus, when you explain that focus, to people, and I say, okay, let's try it. Let's show you how that focus works. Let's do a mindfulness exercise and let's show you how that works. Then can you see how powerful focusing on one thing at a time can be to towards your success or whatever. But yes, it's disruption. You have to disrupt the thought patterns in people's heads that, because even for neurodiverse people, you'll get people who say, well, I've always done it this way. This is the coping strategy I've learned to get around this problem. And I say, okay, let's analyze that there. You're absolutely right. If you've developed a strategy and you call it a coping strategy, but a coping strategy doesn't suggest it's a solution. It just suggests it's a way that you found to get around the problem, which is good. But now we need to think, can we make that better? Can we actually improve upon that?
Yeah.
And that's where, this is where, the neurodiverse strengths, come in work, in entrepreneurship. It's this disruption bit to say, why do we do it this way? Why do we put the files in this order on the shelf or whatever it is? It's something which might sound so trivial, or why don't we have a color coded system because it'd be clearer for everyone to understand it or something like that? Why do we use calendars on our Outlook, let's say, and yet nobody's been shown that you can change appointments to different colors, so it's just easier visually to see what you're doing and things like that, and to not to make so many double booking errors and things like that.
I think what you're saying here, Chris, is certainly giving me so much to think about. It's real fascinating. And on the back of, those types of adjustments that you may work with your clients, and to the minutiae sometimes through to, I guess, the bigger issues where you are really focusing on helping someone to get focused and reflect on who they are and how they work. How much do you think now we've made progress with the universality, if that's the right way of putting it, of those adjustments? So we talk about the disruptor, whether it's a neurodiverse colleague or somebody experiencing other differences, going into a workplace with somebody like you as a great advocate and ally to them, and them saying, hey, we don't need to work like this. If you can figure out how best to work with me, it's going to suit everybody. It's a good fit for us all, and it moves us on as an organisation. Have you, do you feel that we're finally recognising that the changes that we do for one colleague actually can benefit everybody as well? Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence, for example, that there's a lot of design evidence, for example, if you design a building well, then you don't just design it for one group of people, you design it for several groups of people, and it meets several different needs. For example, one of the simplest ones is if you think in shops, shops that have decided to have wider aisles and things like that, so perhaps wheelchairs can get through them, also means mums with prams can get through them more easily and things like that. So there's those little changes, those little sort of changes where you think you're helping one group that inadvertently help other groups. There's an interesting case at the moment. I'm going to be very interested to see where this case goes. I think it's an autistic guy who is challenging Sainsbury's in the courts to allow him to take what he calls an assistance cat, because the cat sits on his shoulder sort of thing. It just calms him down and makes him feel more content and things like that. And he wants to be able to take this cat in like, say, a blind person would be able to take their guide dog in. it will just be very interesting to see where this goes, because there is somebody also who's trained miniature ponies to help keep people calm on the underground and things like that, and also on the, I think it's the Newcastle Metro. And again, it's this idea of it's an animal that you wouldn't traditionally associate with being an assistance animal. So most people think of a dog and possibly think of a guide dog, or hearing dogs for the deaf, or something like that, or whatever, or dogs that will fetch things for people. But most people don't think of other animals where the potential is, and again, obviously not all animals can do that, but some animals are just well suited personally to particular helpful traits and things like that, or particular calming traits.
It's and fascinating discussion, isn't it? Do you feel, and we're going to, I could talk to you forever, Chris, because this is, we might invite you back if that's okay, because this is a really
sorry, Donna, can I just answer your
yes, please
your
do.
Main question directly?
Yeah.
Sorry, I realised.
No, it's okay. It's my fault, Chris, because you're firing off lots of ideas in me.
Yeah. So this question, the question about sort of why do organisations do what they need to do is, it still comes down to being just good business. It really does come down to that, because if we get emotional, we say you should make the changes just simply because you should just be nice people. People don't get that. They kind of like, well, yeah, we're nice people. What do you mean we're not nice people? We didn't know we weren't nice people. But if you say to them, look, there's 20 billion pounds out there, what they call the purple pound. There's 20 billion pounds of money that you may be losing because you're leaving it on the table, because you're making your business practices and the way you work and the way your customers interact with you, you're just making it hard work for people who have disabilities or are neurodiverse to do business with you. Have you thought of how much money you could be making? And also, like you were just saying there, indirectly, you make one thing easier. Asda, I think it is, that have got this thing now where they turn off their music and things like that for perhaps an hour at a time and things like that. Well, how often do most people sort of sit there and think, I don't want to hear the annoying music? They've not got autism or anything like that. They just find it annoying. And so especially at Christmas, where you think, oh, God, it's that music again, sort of thing, playing away in the background, sort of the 100,000th time sort of thing. Now, that might not be enough to stop somebody doing something, but nonetheless, you might stay in the shop longer if you thought you weren't being driven out by the sort of thing. So, yes, I think businesses, public sector or private sector, businesses still need to see what they would see as a business case to change. And I think it's not as difficult to make as people think, because it's sometimes just a case of saying, look, if you change this and change this, it'll cost you nothing. I remember meeting an employer where an employer was going to change their whole reception. They were going to get a firm of architects in to redesign all the front of their reception area of their building, because they were going to take on a blind person. And I said, no. I said, you don't need to do that. I said, I'll show you what to do. So I literally moved a few things around in reception. I said, right, they come in through this front door. They put their hand on the back of the sofa and they move along the back of the sofa. They turn 90 degrees left and walk straight into their office.
Fantastic.
I said, you were going to someone was going to charge you £25,000 to do that.
It is. Well, there's a lot of fear out there about making a mistake, I guess, with organisations as well, Chris.
There is.
Bearing in mind that then, and what you've just said about sometimes, I know we say a lot these days, one size doesn't fit all, but sometimes if we get the right size, we can get pretty good at fitting a lot of our needs, actually. Yeah. Do you feel, therefore, because, organisations maybe, I hope, are listening more, do you feel optimistic then for the future? You've had this illustrious career which continues. As you reflect back to where we've been, are we going to a good place now, do you think?
We're in a better place. Okay. We're in a better place. We're still on a journey. Things can be quite patchy. Surprisingly, and this does surprise a lot of people, is this isn't an area that the public sector does as well as you might think or expect. We all tend to think the public sector should get these things right because, it's publicly funded and, they should know better and, they should have instructions from the government to do X and implement X and whatever. It's not always the case that the public sector is the best at making reasonable adjustments or whatever, because quite often it will say, well, we're so big that we can't change that because that would be unfair to those people, so we won't do that. And we can't change that because we'd have to change all the policies and procedures, and we can't do that. Whereas private organisations, like you used Dyson, for example, a private organisation, I mean, the amount of times I've sat in a managing director's office and said, we need to do X. This person needs, coloured filter on their screen or something like that, some particular software. And he's just said, well, when's it going to get done?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can we buy it now? Can we do it now? Do we buy it now? What do we do? Because that's the way they're used to working, is they're used to working where someone makes a decision and something's done, not somebody makes a decision and then 10 people have to implement it and things like that, and they don't want to. But we're certainly in a better place. I mean, I think back to when I left school, there were very, very few opportunities for disabled people or anyone really with a difference. Most of them were discriminatory because they would perhaps mean you would be put in a supported workshop or a sheltered workshop or something like that and kept out the way of every mainstream people, or you'd be in a day centre or whatever it might be, or be just hidden. But things have moved on a lot, but my experience in workplaces where the workplaces do the best change is when there's somebody championing the disability or neurodiversity, somebody who's sort of just got that little bit of responsibility to sort of, keep asking the questions, keep asking, is this being done? Is this being done? Why are we doing this? Could we do this better?
Yeah.
I think, no organisation should sit there and sort of sit on its laurels and sort of think it's okay.
Yeah. No, and I think, what you said there resonates with my experience as well, is that, yes, awareness, the culture, and then we need the conversations to continue, and with allies and champions, and that commitment as well. And, I wholeheartedly agree with what you said as well, Chris. Yes, it's about winning hearts and minds, but we also need to think about why this makes great business sense as well, isn't it? And I hope these types of conversations and your fantastic work helps to make those changes, ongoing, because you're right, we're not quite there yet, but the journey is not too bad. We're starting to really make some changes that we've all been desperately campaigning and working hard to make. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you. That was a really fascinating conversation. We covered a lot of issues that I didn't know we were going to talk about, and that's always a great sign, because it means that we've really been thinking about the issues at stake here. So thank you so much.
I love talking to people, as I'm sure you all have all gathered, and that. So, a conversation with me may be the start of a journey. It may be a start of me signposting you to something else more suitable if it's not me, or whatever. But, hopefully perhaps Donna will invite me back for another chat on another subject, or similar subject or whatever.
Definitely, Chris. I think, your wisdom and your expertise is much valued, and thank you for all your years of service to the communities. I love what you said about that shake up about trying to help people reach their potential and really reframe things. So thank you so much. And, you said earlier, the awards that you've been given, the recognition, they're not given lightly. And so we know that, the caliber of the work that you do is brilliant. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the contact details. And we will also share that as well. That just leaves me to say thank you again to you, but also to thank you to our listeners. And we really hope this conversation has been useful and gives us all a shake up in the nicest possible way about thinking about how we work and how we can get the best of ourselves and our workplaces, and maybe even be inspired to go on and be a disruptor and start your own business as well, which would be brilliant. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to welcoming you next time around. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video as much as we did putting it together. Now, we have some more fantastic content for you. Please feel free to click this link here and learn more about Roger Broadbent. and some of the strides he's making to put dyslexia support at the heart of education. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.